I mean, I think it's a switch in perspective of seeing wine not as just a product, but like as a living thing that has this powerful ability to show transparency back to a plot of land.
Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles. Thanks for listening. I'm so excited to have had the conversation that I had that I'm going to share with you now with Gina and Mikey Giugni. They are the owners and winemakers of two wineries that are really side by side in the same location, the Scar of the Sea and Lady of the Sunshine wineries. And we cover a lot of territory in this interview, from the importance of organic and biodynamic certification, wine packaging and ingredients lists, how to handle problem wines as natural winemakers with limited tools, the challenges of farming a small vineyard, Central Coast homestead ciders and co-ferments of mondeuse and gruner veltliner with lime leaves made under the Scar of the Sea label, why lease is your friend in natural winemaking, and why new oak can sometimes be necessary in natural winemaking, why Edna Valley is a great place for romance if you're a winemaker, why farming your own grapes changes the way you think about winemaking, and what a healthy vineyard should look like, among many other things. So strap in, stay tuned, be prepared to meet two of the loveliest young winemaking couple people in the Central Coast. Enjoy. Mikey, Gina, welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast. It's nice
Hi,
to talk to you
Adam.
guys.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, Adam. Stoked to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure. My pleasure. Truly. It's funny you say stoked because one of the things I was going to say was I think the first time, Mikey, you and I talked, I just called the number on your website randomly and I caught you driving back from surfing. Is that a daily thing for you?
It's not daily.
Okay.
It is part of my mental health. I surfed this morning, and I try to make the time to surf as often as I can, or at least just to do something outside. So whether it's like a bike ride or surfing or fishing, yeah,
That's nice.
Yeah.
Do you have anything like that, Gina?
Oh, surfing is not my cup of tea, but I love watching Mikey surf on the beach. I really
No, I
enjoy.
just mean, do you have anything
Yeah,
anything
yoga.
like that?
Oh yeah, yoga has definitely been a huge tool for my body recovering from the labor in the vineyard and
Yeah.
mental health as well. Yeah, yoga is definitely what suits me.
Gina likes
Nice.
to be I feel like she's like an arts and craftsy person too. She like presses flowers and
Oh, nice.
Gardening,
yeah.
cooking.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you guys do any of that stuff for like your wine club? Do you use any of those crafty things in the?
I would love to. It's in development.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I've worked with our friends at Stepladder Ranch up in Cambria. They make delicious cheeses from goats that
Ooh.
they have up there, and I always include some cheese in like my wine club.
Oh, nice.
It's like a fun. I think cheese and wine is like a great pairing, especially like hard, salty cheeses. And then also just being able to pump up a friend and other small business is like.
And stock our fridge as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Well, where are you guys right now? Where are you located?
Well, we live in Pismo Beach. We're in our living room right now. So we live
Pismo.
in this little old 1960s kind of beach house up in the hills above Pismo. And that's about 10 minutes from the Vineyard Gina Farms in the Edna Valley. And it's about 10 to 15 minutes from our winery, which is in like a warehouse building in San Luis Obispo.
In San Luis Obispo. Oh, like the town or the county area?
The town of Slow. Yeah, we have like
Really?
Industrial, if you will, winery in Slow. It's on a road called Tank Farm Road, and
Okay.
it used to be a diesel auto body, so it was called Diesel Row before it was Scar of the Sea and Lady of the Sunshine.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful town. Like I I don't know how many people know how like what a cool little town Slough is, but I love it. That's very cool. Does that bring tourism? Do you do tastings at the winery?
That we don't really do real tastings at the winery, like not open necessarily to the public.
Gotcha.
We
Okay.
do tastings by appointment through emails. Like someone that wants to taste our wines and puts the effort into getting a hold of us, we definitely will make time for them. But we don't have a team or a setup for it, so it's rather time consuming to host tastings, as I'm sure you know.
It is. Yeah. So you guys are mostly distributed then, not doing direct
We
sales.
we sell direct through our website, um,
Okay.
and and then we have a wine club option sign up through our website, and then we actually sell pretty good direct sales through Instagram and just kind of our websites. But then no, like we don't. It's not like a tasting room direct model,
Oh, okay. That's very interesting.
and that kind
Do
of
you wish?
happened by accident through COVID. We never really used to sell much wine on our website, but
We actually built out the front room of our winery building to be a tasting room. So it's there in existence, but we don't actually operate it at this point. Especially because
And
of the turbulence of the last year and the uncertainty of being able to know when we could open or not. But I think it's given us a lot of time to reflect and, put value in our time, and we don't want to stretch ourselves too thin. So until we can hire someone to help us and find that right person, um,
yeah, we sell to our
yeah,
distributors basically, and then through our website. And it just
okay.
makes it so we can keep our team tight and kind of have our weekends and kind of again like our own time, our own mental health because we do work a lot. So
it's easy to work every day,
yeah,
and so
Yeah. Yes.
we've had to we have to draw the line somewhere.
No, and I'm like trying to decide which is harder, like having a small micro production winery like we have, and then working other jobs, which is sort of like having two full-time jobs,
100%.
or
Yeah.
should we just like go straight into like a much? What is your production? So we should say, or I should say, I should have done better. You're you have two wineries. One is Scar of the Sea, the other is Lady of the Sunshine. Mikey's and Gina's, respectively.
Correct.
So yes, okay. I just want to lay that out there. So we're just jumping into all these sort of random things, but we'll get back to some of these details. But some of this
Sure.
stuff is interesting to me. I think we'll start at the end and then work our way backwards, I guess. Um, you, yeah.
yeah,
What's your production
we
for each?
Scar of the Sea is about 3,500 cases, somewhere between 35 and 4,000, depending on the vintage and like what we get.
And Lady of the Sunshine, I've been growing for the past 4 years. Started very small with just like a few barrels, and now I'm up to about 1,200 cases.
So
Oh, that's
combined,
Yeah.
we're somewhere close, maybe just north or just like close to 5,000 total.
gotcha. And I know so Lady of the Sunshine is at least part of it. You are using a vineyard, so of course you're I mean, you're farming 6.5 acres, the Chene Vineyard, right?
Yeah, the Chene Vineyard.
Chene,
Um,
sorry.
no, it's okay. Yeah,
And
I've
then
been farming the Chene Vineyard since the beginning of 2018.
and so I'm guessing the production depends on sort of what your yield is that year from the vineyard, whether it was a big year or a small year. Or do
Yeah,
you control that pretty well? I mean, are you pretty tight? Do you drop fruit? Do you
The interesting part about Chene is it's planted to 1 acre of Chardonnay and then
Okay.
5.5 acres of Pinot Noir.
Okay.
So I use all of the Chardonnay for my production for Lady of the Sunshine.
Okay.
As far as the Pinot Noir, I produce probably about a third of the total fruit that comes off the property. It's
Okay.
in honesty, it's too much Pinot,
Got
and
it.
then
Yep.
but it's also provided a really awesome opportunity to work with other local winemakers who are interested in purchasing biodynamic fruit. Um,
Gotcha.
and
Yeah.
so,
And so it's a pretty amazing idea actually. Well, it just works well for us because we can sell the fruit. It helps us cash flow the vineyard along with Gina making fruit from it. And so it's kind of
Kind of best of both
Yeah,
worlds.
exactly. We get to work with our
Gotcha.
friends. They get to purchase fruit that's farmed really well, and
Yep.
then it insulates the burden of the farming costs so that it can kind of just be diversified a little bit.
Yep.
Small
Yeah.
vineyards are the tricky part about the small vineyard is you still need all the same equipment at 6.5 acres as you would a 20-acre vineyard. So you still need
Right.
the tractor and all the right implements, and you have to be set up to be able to do everything else you would do on a larger property, even at 6.5 acres.
And that's why a lot of like
Um,
smaller vineyards are farmed by management companies. And so
Okay.
it's a more rare side that a vineyard this size owns all their equipment and is farmed not by a management company. And that's one of like the coolest things about Gina's Vineyard is that the owners did buy into the idea to make it kind of sustainable in the way that they own all their own equipment and they're not reliant on a farm management company.
Got it. Yeah. So you're a true vigneron in that sense, where you're hands on all the way through the process from year round in the vineyard and in the winery.
yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to have to be able to get to know a place so intimately through farming it all year round, and then to be able to seasonally make wine from it too. It really helps build a connection, which has drawn me closer to my wines through the process.
I love
Yeah.
that. Well, let's jump back then because I did sort of jump ahead. Let's talk about your backgrounds. Mikey, I think you're from the sort of Southern California area originally. Is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Ranch Cucamonga, so
Okay.
east of LA, southeast of LA in the Inland Empire. Wasn't
Yep.
always a place I was necessarily proud to be from, but I through time and just understanding, like I actually love Cucamonga. I think
Uh-huh.
it's an interesting place. I actually now today make wine from Cucamonga. There's some
Yes.
really amazing old vineyards down there, and
Yes.
historically, it's an incredible agricultural area. It's lost that just through the urban sprawl of
Mm-hmm.
Right.
California. But at one time, Cucamonga was the largest grape growing region in the United States, kind of
Yeah.
pre prohibition.
I mean, I know the vineyards you're talking about. I'm hoping to also be making wine from that vineyard this year. We'll
Oh,
see.
very cool.
Yeah, and
With the
yeah, like
Hofer or the Lopez?
Lopez, yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, and 100-year-old, dry farmed, certified organic, pretty crazy stuff, pre-prohibition established, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
is like this craziest place. Like the Lopez
It's
Vineyard is just so bizarre because we've driven past it a million times. It's on the corner of the 15 freeway and the 210 freeway. Um,
right. Yeah, it's like you're looking at freeways next to this, like one of the oldest vineyards in California. It's
and it's
hilarious.
huge. It's 100 acres.
Yeah,
But it gets a quarter ton an acre because
yeah, exactly.
it's dry farmed and there's no inputs. They don't
Yeah,
spray.
right.
They
It's
do some tillage. They disc the weeds
right.
and that's pretty much it other than
It's
prune.
just it's
Um,
just sand too.
it's like it has more structure than just sand. The Hofer
Okay.
Vineyard down by the Ontario airport is literally sand. Um,
Wow.
but
Okay. Well,
the Lopez Vineyard is like cobblestone, like granite rocks and sand. Um,
wow.
and yeah, supposedly the roots are going down as far as 40 feet. They
Right.
they were irrigated for the majority of for I guess the first half of their life. They were flood irrigated. But
Uh,
they haven't been irrigated since I want to say like sometime in the 70s or 80s,
oh wow.
which makes
So
sense for how they're just established in Cucamonga. There's 6 inches of rain there, so
right.
establishing a dry farm vineyard would be rather tough.
Takes a
Yeah.
lot of water in the beginning, it
Yeah,
sounds like.
yeah,
Well, I presumably why the roots are so deep to reach whatever they can reach.
yeah, for sure.
That
But yeah, I
so
grew up in Cucamonga. I did not come from a wine family. My
yeah. So how did that happen? How did you go from
Hmm.
full circle from leaving Cucamonga, getting into wine, and coming back to make wine from Cucamonga? What was that journey?
Yeah, I
What
I
was
went
the
to,
first step, I should say, that led you on that journey?
well, I guess the first step was basically going and finding myself in San Luis Obispo. And so
Okay.
I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and I studied engineering. I have a degree in
Okay.
engineering. And while I was in school, we would drink wine, to get drunk probably.
Right.
And
Sure.
and we would go wine
College.
tasting and bike wine tasting, take our bikes out to the Edna Valley. And I just remember being like, "Oh, this is cool," but it was really nothing more than that. And then, um, and then that started to become more of a habit, and started to drink wine more and more. And I worked an engineering job, and I was 23 years old, and I kind of had like an early midlife crisis, and realized that I did not want to be sitting in a cubicle doing AutoCAD. Um,
Mm.
and I got a job in a tasting room, and then from there found a small vineyard to farm. So I kind of bullshitted my way into a little 5-acre vineyard in Santa Margarita that the guy let me and my friend farm, where I ended up living for like 4 years and farming, and then kind of just started chasing harvests. And so I worked in Santa Maria Valley, and then I went to Tasmania and made wines over there.
And that's where
Oh.
you learned
And that's
your
where
love for sparkling and cider.
that's where I learned like more detailed about how to make sparkling wine, and that is where I've really started to understand cider, and that cider
Were,
was actually is a fruit wine. and
were you
and
making cider there?
I did make some cider there. Or the producer that was across the street from where I worked was making cider,
Okay.
called Delamere. And he was making, like, he called it an apple wine. And they make a lot of sparkling wine there. So he had picked some apples and was basically sparkling wine with cider. And that was the first kind of like, oh, like,
It's not that
yeah,
different.
it's just apple juice instead of grape juice.
Right.
And so, yeah, when I came back, there's some really cool orchards in Avila Beach, and no one was really making cider down here at that time. It was a lot of sweet cider, like Angry Orchards and whatever else.
Right.
And so, yeah, in 2012, I made my first Pinot Noir, and my white wine was going to be a cider. So I made cider and Pinot in 2012, and I was just young and naive and didn't really have a plan. I just thought that I wanted to make wine, and I knew eventually I would want to work for myself. So I just kind of started, and then from there, just the ball just kind of kept rolling, and my evolution has continued. I didn't start out by making or having an idea that I was going to be wanting to farm regenerative or organic or biodynamic or make natural wines. But as I started to fall further into the wine rabbit hole, I just kept evolving and will continue to evolve.
Right.
We will continue to, our preferences and styles will most likely continue to change and evolve into where we go.
I love that. Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, I know that journey. It's the unusual person who starts out with a real clear philosophical thing, unless it's later in their life. I mean, yeah. But your first interest is just sort of in wine and that experience. And I mean, I first learned to make wine at home basically using a recipe, which was like
Right.
you had
Well,
this much yeast nutrients and this much yeast at this blah blah
exactly.
blah.
And I
Like
mean, we had the same experience, because my first jobs, I never worked for anyone that made wine how we make wine. Like, it was
right,
a very reactionary winemaking, like recipe winemaking, like add this, add that. And honestly, as an engineer, it didn't make much logical sense to me. It was like, why would, just like, even champagne, like method champagne, makes no sense. Like, there's
right,
yeast and sugar in grapes. Like, why are you adding sugar from cane sugar and to make bubbles? And the same thing with just yeast in wine, like inoculating or like adding tannin or all these different products that were being added. It just, when I worked for a place and it was like that, it, by the time it was like my third vintage and I was understanding what was going on, it was like, why are we doing this?
yeah. It's I have tons of questions. If you've scanned any of the other episodes of this podcast, you probably know I have a fondness for cider and have had some real apple people on here from the East Coast. And it sounds like you, from what I know, are making your cider in a kind of rare way, in a way that's, I mean, a little more. It's a little more traditional from a American cider making standpoint, but not traditional from what people think of as cider. If you go to a bar and order cider, or even from what some of the finer ciders, which tend more towards that method champenoise style. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about your cider making? Like, so, I mean, so I have an episode with Andy Brennan,
Okay, cool.
from Aaron Burr, and it
Yeah.
sounds like you guys are doing something very similar in stylistically, at least
Yeah,
in your
I've been a big
cider making.
fan of his ciders for a long time. They're kind of hard to find around here, so we don't drink that
Yeah.
much of them. But like my wine career, my cider careers had an evolution. But currently what I do, and I've been working with one orchard now for the last 5 vintages, and it's in Aptos, California, and it's owned
Where's
by
that?
Aptos is like South Santa Cruz, kind of close
Okay.
inland Corralitos, and
Okay.
it's an old apple region. And it's owned by my friend the Theriots, and Kyle's grandpa planted the orchard in the 1940s, and his grandpa farmed it, and then his dad farmed it, and now he's farming it. And Kyle's the viticulturalist for Ridge at Montebello,
Oh, really? Okay.
and so it's a really special place, and it's dry farmed. It's farmed with no inputs other than pruning, and it's old American varieties. So it's Newtown Pippin, which is one of America's first apples. It came from Queens, like the late 1700s, and kind of moved its way across the country. And
Huh.
anyway, so all my cider comes from there, and just my traditional cider, like my cider that's just normal cider, is barrel fermented. It's aged in barrel for a full year. And then the next year, I blend in fermenting cider from the same orchard, about 10%, and bottle it. And so there's really not much to that cider. That's just trying to show like a terroir and a purity of what that cider is. And Newtown Pippin is great because it has good acidity and it has tannin.
Nice.
It's a little darker. It's not like just a thin acidic cider. It's kind of chewy and textured. Um,
Ooh.
and so I really like that cider. And then lately, as of in the last few years, I used to also make a hop cider. I stopped doing that, and now I'm kind of just, I think in 2018 I started making
Mm-hmm.
co-ferment ciders. And so I was doing a hop cider, and it was really popular, and I liked it because the hops brought these really cool aromatics to the cider. I would use
Mm.
Nielsen Sauv and Amarillo, and it would bring these like tropical citrus tones. But the problem was I just didn't really know where the hops were coming from. It was really hard to
Uh,
like understand the sourcing of them and how they were farmed.
We also had a cellar full of tropical Sauvignon Blanc.
Exactly. So it was like, you know what? How can I
Yeah.
not purchase stuff like that, and I can work with produce that is grown locally,
Yeah.
and
right.
so I co-fermented cider with some Sauvignon Blanc that Gina was using, and that gave me the tropical tones. And then I got lime leaves from my friend's orchard up in
Cambria.
Cambria, and I basically like steeped the cider in lime leaves, and so it was like this kind of Sauv Blanc cider co-ferment with lime leaves. And so I'll do like a normal cider, and then I do a co-ferment cider, and I kind of changing it up each year. Like in 2021 or 2020, I did like a mondeuse co-ferment cider with some mondeuse that Rajpar was growing up in Cambria, and I did a gruner cider, and then I did my traditional cider.
Did, did you have a favorite of any of those? Did any of those really work? I mean, it sounds like you're sort of trying different things.
Yeah,
Did any of
they
those?
do different things for sure. The mondeuse cider it's dark. It's a red wine, it's like Lambrusco, and it is tannic and funky. It's probably the most interesting of the bunch.
Interesting is a loaded word.
It is a loaded word. I think it's the most. Yeah, maybe interesting is the right word. It's just like it has a lot of stuff going on. It's like
Well, it's just not what you expect from a cider, like the amount of
Right.
tannin and the amount of color.
yeah, and it's like it has like sarsaparillus and cola, and then it's like salty and like a little natty, if you will, just because there's no sulfur. So it's like
Okay.
it has this like natural wine vibe that maybe a lot of my wines don't totally have because I use sulfur.
right?
And then I think my favorite is, and it has traditionally just been the co-ferment with the white wine. So it's a gruner veltliner cider with lime leaves, and it's like Gina calls it like jungle juice. It's just like green and tropical, and like
It goes down way too easy.
yeah, they're dangerous.
Ooh.
So that yeah, those I don't know if I really truly have a favorite. They're all pretty different, which is good. I have three ciders that are pretty drastically different from each other.
Okay.
And
I
yeah,
love that.
it's
I mean,
fun. I like making cider, and it's relatively low work. Oh, and then actually, lastly, I did make one more cider, and this one was not normal, but um, I've had a crush on Mount Hood Organics, which is a orchard up in Oregon, which is very far away, and not typically my cup of tea to drive so far to get cider. But we wanted to go visit Nate Reddy at Hayu, and
yeah.
we combined a trip to visit Nate and pick up a big mix of apples from Mount Hood Organics, which is a biodynamic certified orchard in like the base of Mount Hood.
Okay.
And so that's in barrel right now.
Oh, nice. So, is it something you might do again,
Yeah, I'm probably going to
or
do it again. That one's going to be a slightly different. I'm going to make a non-vintage Solera style cider.
okay?
And so that one will be a few years in the works.
So, do you have to have a different crusher, like a different equipment in general for the cider versus your winemaking?
No,
Like
we
crush
used our
and
basket
press?
press to press the Mount Hood organic stuff.
Okay.
And I do have two baskets, and so I use one basket for the apples and then one basket for my red wines.
Okay.
Our white wines are all pressed in our bladder press, and then we have a
Okay.
basket press, like kind of like a wood hydraulic basket press that we press all our red wines in.
All right. Is that just it's gentle, more gentle with the bladder press for the whites,
Yeah,
or?
I mean, no, the basket
Actually,
press is
inverse.
actually more gentle.
Oh,
There's
okay.
no
Reverse. Yeah.
spinning. So if you think of a bladder press, the way a bladder press works is you load it and it presses and then it spins, so it breaks
Right.
the cake, and then it presses
Right.
again.
Good
And the
point. Yeah.
spinning is actually much more harsh, and you can get
More
yeah, you
tannin.
can get more tannin and oxidation and just extraction. So traditionally, red wine is pressed in a basket press, and then a bladder press is pretty great for unfermented white wine. You get
Got it.
a
So you're
more
just getting the juice out as like getting every drop of juice versus the red. You've already got a lot of extraction. It's
yeah,
already more
the
tannic.
basket press is interesting. So it doesn't get like the tannins are different. So you have more gentle tannins because of not the movement of the bladder. And then
Uh-huh.
also you get less solids. So the juice actually filters through the cake, and you don't get
Oh yeah.
as much sediment like
The
leasiness.
lees. Hmm.
And
Right,
so it's
right.
really great for wines that you don't have to rack. So we don't rack any of our wines, and we
Until bottling.
until bottling.
Yeah.
And so we're on like really nice lees, and we get really good lees through a basket press versus a
S-
bladder press. You're going to have a lot more leesiness, and you might have some reduction or some bad
Right.
lees that can give some funk to the wine. So you'll typically do a racking on those kind of wines.
I've noticed that as well. So what is the advantage to have being able to stay on the fine lees, and from your perspective?
There's a lot of advantages. But
Yeah.
I guess the first advantage that I can think of is dissolved CO2.
Mhm.
And so, as making natural wines, like we want to have as many advantages as we can. And so, the more dissolved CO2 in the wine, the less likely it is to oxidize. The less likely it's a natural preservative, and
Right.
so dissolved CO2 comes out in a warmer cellar, and then with more wine movements. And so, by not having to rack, I'm going to keep more of this dissolved CO2 in my wine. It also
Expose it to less oxygen because you're not racking.
exactly less oxygen because I'm not racking. And then lees is just a pretty magical substance, and
It's
it
almost like a natural filter. Like we've added it. If we have any white wines, we do most of our fermentations for white wine in barrel. And if
Mhm.
anything ends up going a little reduced, we can add clean lees to it, and it'll kind of
Mhm.
filter through the wine,
it's like a
and,
finding.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it finds it out.
Yeah.
Basically, can pull
Interesting.
out bad aromatics.
Also, have you found it helpful in sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Giving nutrition for malolactic fermentation as well.
Yeah,
So
it
you get
definitely can. We haven't actually done that, but I know that I've heard that. That's basically just what it's like, yeast holes, so
yeah, yeah. So exactly,
it's a
if and
natural.
that's I mean, one of the techniques I've heard for sort of helping mallow finish is just stirring the lees.
Yeah,
So
100%. And
yeah,
I don't typically like to stir my lees, but when I smell some Chardonnay barrels and it's like, oh, this wine's like going slow through mallow, like I'll stir the lees and get the lees up in solution,
yeah,
Mhm.
and that will it typically like freshens up the wine as well, because the lees has like a redox potential, and it can basically kind of make the wine go back into a more reduced state. And so it's pretty. Lees is definitely our friend,
yeah. Do you
on all wines, really.
have you had the ability to sort of compare something that you used, that it was on the lees versus not, to say whether you got a textural component out of the lees in the finished wine? I mean,
That's a great question.
I don't think we've done anything in comparison like that because we've kind of always utilized lees in
Yeah,
our winemaking
right,
style.
right.
yeah. I
And
can't
we've
truly say
always
that we have.
we always invite texture on our wines as well, so it's
And
we press into it.
I aged my whites for a long time to try to get as much lees like autolysis as I can. My whites are on lees for like 17 or 18 months.
Oh wow.
and and that's because I picked the wines on the earlier side for the natural acidity. They go through full mallow. They get picked, early, like 19 to 20 bricks. And if they're bottled too soon, they're a bit too austere. And,
Yeah.
and so I use the extended aging both for the slow oxidation and the autolysis in the lees to bring this component of richness to the wine,
So
without
this
having to use new oak or picking too ripe to where the acidity is not where I want.
Yeah, so I tasted your Scar of the Sea Chardonnay recently. Thank you guys for
Yeah.
the bottles, the samples. That was awesome. I had to share them with other people because Wendy and I couldn't plow through all 4 bottles ourselves, unfortunately. But so that Chardonnay is distinctive. First of all, to me, and I don't even want to say anything about it, but I want to kind of know the winemaking behind it to see if my guesses are right about it. But it had a real strong aromatic quality that was what I would associate with. I mean, it was like popcorn to me, sort of corn nut. Like what I would expect from a not necessarily the style of wine that I would associate with you, but then the finish was like razor sharp, like a just an acid slice at the end. So what you've said now, that matches up. But what about that the corn nut? Does that
I don't know because I haven't drank that wine just totally recently. But
okay?
that wine,
This was the Bassy
it's a
Vineyard.
Bassy Chardonnay. So that wine comes from a vineyard in Avila Beach that's farmed organic. It's on sandstone. It's on sand. It for me, it has a reduced aspect, which comes from the soils there are really thin and it's not fertilized, so the yan is
Yeah,
low on those
yeah,
grapes, and so it's naturally slightly reduced. Um,
yeah, yep,
and then the combo there also is that wine's aged for a long time and it goes through full mallow. The zippiness and like the acid part is because it's picked early. It has a finished
sure,
pH
sure.
of 3.1.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but but like maybe the popcorn or corn nut is through full mallow, and then also probably the oak aging. There is a little touch of new oak on that wine, and
I was wondering. Yeah, I
that's
mean,
because that's not necessarily as like intended. That's because that wine is aged in large 500-liter barrels,
uh-huh.
and you can't find used
Used. Yeah,
old
I've tried. I know.
500-liter barrels. I've searched far and wide,
Yep,
and
yep.
so if you want
I'm on.
to
I'm like on
slowly,
a list for those.
yeah,
Actually, I
if you
have my
if you
name. I'm
want
like,
to,
just call me if you ever get any
yeah,
500
no one
liter.
will ever do that.
Yeah, I know. There's probably 10 other, 20, 100 other people who have said that to them.
Yeah. but
That's
yeah,
funny.
so
No,
just like
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
if you want to have those barrels to make wine, and eventually at one point you need to have a small amount of them new, because that's the only way that you can get
Yeah.
the barrels you want.
Add to your collection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
as the time goes on, that wine will become less and less oaky. But
Yeah.
that vintage had a percentage of new oak. So there's going to be an oak aspect. I don't hate
Yeah.
the oak, actually. I actually liked it. It makes the wine be a bit more classic, and Burgundian, if you will, than say my complete true style is.
Yeah.
But I think
I,
that the oak plays well with the acid there. Like the wine is so tight and has so
yeah.
much energy that a little bit of the richness that comes from the oak
Yep.
is a good thing. Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, those were my guesses. I was like, I was like, I can't imagine this, but I have to guess that there was some new oak on this. I imagined a really long, slow malolactic
mhm.
transition because that would lend to that sort of diacetyl element being a little more prominent. Um, so those were my guesses basically,
And
and it
I
sounds
like
like yeah,
mallow in wine, so all my wines
yeah,
go through
yeah.
full mallow, and
Well,
they're stable that way. I don't have to do anything with the
exactly,
wine, and
exactly
so
right.
that's what I do prefer. And then the oak, it's aged in like light toast, like Austrian oak, and so
Oh,
it's
nice.
not even like it's like as far from toasty as you can get, and it's still to an experienced taster like you can pick it up.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Sure. Well, and look, I totally agree. I mean, this is a really good example. Like, if you want to do a large format, what are those called? Demi-mudes, or what are
yeah, they're
they?
puncheons, or it's like a 500
Puncheons,
liter
puncheons, that's right, a
barrel. Yeah.
puncheon. I mean, you have to use some new, and I just think like a total prohibition against new oak seems silly because like that's just part of the evolution of winemaking. Like you get a barrel, it's new, and then you use it for 10 years, and it's not new, and then you get to taste you're
Exactly.
making wine changes, and you could even use it on different. You could have different programs. You could have a new wine that you put a certain vineyard does really well with new oak, and so you put all of your new through that for a couple years, and then transition it to another more elegant vineyard that really doesn't stand up to new oak, or it's a different grape that doesn't stand up as well. I just think there's so many. It's a paintbrush. It's one of the. I mean, it's a palette of different things that you can use as you're painting with, and I think it's just reading vineyards and reading the wine and experimenting, and I think it adds something lovely, like you said, when it's done right, when it's the right wine and everything. I think Chardonnay with oak is fantastic most times. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, I don't think that like, it's not done as a dogmatic or a recipe thing. It's just exactly what you said. It's like I wanted larger format barrels for space and to ferment in, and then they have to be new at some point, and
yeah,
it'll change. and
yeah,
and when one goes bad eventually someday, I'm gonna have to get another new one, and it's
yeah,
gonna do it's gonna do that. And
I like the saying how oak can be used like salt in cooking.
mhm.
You want
right,
it to be so intertwined into the flavors that you can't essentially pick it out. It just enhances everything else.
And like we
yes,
we
Yeah.
love barrels. We ferment like all our whites are fermented in barrel, and all of
yeah,
our wines are aged in barrel. And like oak is
yep,
amazing. And like yeah, new oak can be distracting in wine, and I don't like that distraction either. But the use of oak is crucial to how we make our wines.
yeah, yeah. Well, Gina, I didn't forget about you. I want to hear your story now. Where are you from, and what got you started?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Southern California as a kid, but my family moved us up to Northern California to the Sierra foothills when I was 8 years old. Um,
Okay, why'd
yeah.
they do that to you?
um, my parents fell down the rabbit hole of wine when we were living in Huntington
Oh,
Beach. My parents joined a tasting group and started making wine in their garage in our Huntington Beach house. And then they started searching for property to go move away to plant a vineyard and change their careers. My dad was from close to Sacramento, so he knew of the small town Placerville that's between Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe, and we bought 90 acres back in the year 2000. The following year, we planted 15 acres of grapes, and my dad started to learn how to farm. We
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible to look back on their journey. And 20 years later, today they're still farming and making wine and hustling. But they've built something really incredible. The vineyard's called Narrowgate Vineyards, and it wasn't initially that my dad connected all the dots to farming organically. It wasn't really until a few years in that he realized and had the epiphany that, if we're living on the property and if this is now something that's going to be long term, we need to do it in the best way possible to maintain the health of our family and the land. And he had a really good friend, Philip Hart, who started Ambith Estates, which is here on the
Oh
Central
yeah.
Coast in Templeton. My dad has been long time friends with Philip, and Philip was really the bug in his ear that planted the seed of biodynamic farming, and would send my dad books and articles, and he was really the start for my dad to get into biodynamics. But yeah, I
So it's that vineyard is now certified biodynamic. Is that
yeah,
correct?
so
Narrowgate.
yep, it was in 2008 we received our Demeter certification for biodynamics. Um, and then I guess I didn't really fall into wine until I rediscovered it on my own. Wine was so ingrained into our family, and where we lived, and my summers were spent helping my dad in the vineyard and at the winery after school during harvest. It was just too close. I needed to go out and explore other interests before coming back to wine. And it really wasn't until I turned 21, and I was studying biology at Sonoma State. I started working for a winery there in the Russian River Valley, and totally got hooked by Pinot Noir. It was a new varietal to me because my parents grew Rhone varietals mostly. And there was just
Yeah.
this novelty all of a sudden to wine that I hadn't really experienced before. So that's around the time when I changed my major to winemaking, and I ended up transferring schools down to Cal Poly here in San Luis Obispo.
Oh, nice. But you guys, that's not where you guys met at school, is it?
Not necessarily. We were a few years apart in school, so we
Okay.
never linked up there. It wasn't until I was working for a local winery once I transferred down here. I was working for Chamazal in the Edna Valley, and Mikey had worked there a few years prior to me being there, and he had stayed in close relationship with everyone who worked there. They were all of Mikey's friends. And we actually got set up, unbeknownst to me, by our wonderful friend Andrea, who was my boss at the time. She was our Cupid. Yeah.
Nice. That's great. Well,
Yeah.
you also have been around to some interesting places around around the planet, right? And
Yeah. I always wanted to travel and study abroad in school, but since I changed my major and changed universities, I was on the 5-year plan already, and my parents were going to kill me if I took any longer. So as soon as I graduated, I went and worked a vintage in Beaujolais
okay.
for a small family estate. I was there for about 3 or 4 months, and then I went down to Central Otago in New Zealand, and I worked for Burn Cottage down there, which was probably one of my favorite places I've worked and lived. I worked in the vineyard there for 3 months before harvest, which was a really great experience to get to know the region, to know the place, to get to know the wines before we made them, and then I worked 3 months in the cellar. That was kind of the biggest experience for connecting dots was that year, because I got to
Mm,
have a close-up relationship with the vineyards than I got to make the wines from.
that's great.
Yeah, after New Zealand, I jumped up to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and I worked
Hmm.
for Josh Bergstrom, who is an absolute legend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I found my way down to Napa Valley. And then that's kind of where Mikey and I came back together. We took a hiatus after I graduated, and went to France, and then our paths crossed again once I was back in California. And that's also the
Nice.
same year. This was back in 2017. I was working for a biodynamic estate on Hell Mountain, and it was an incredibly beautiful, like perfect perfectly farmed vineyard. But then on the winemaking side, it was finally at the point in my career where I connected the dots, kind of like how Mikey was saying, where it was like, why are we adding these things that already exist naturally in the wines?
Right.
And I would call Mikey complaining. And he'd be like, well, you just need to make your own wines. So he was really the one who pushed me to launch Lady of the Sunshine.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, so you guys have both brought up that evolution, and one that I've been through, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, that sort of dawning awareness about everything in life. I mean, it's wine is part of this whole picture of where pieces of the puzzle start to fall in, and you just realize like how big of an impact agriculture and eating local and organic farming, all these choices that we make multiple times a day of what we consume, really informs these things. And as consumers, we have this power to change that. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but bringing it back to wine, this idea of evolving into this awareness of, hey, there's a more I don't know what the word is. Maybe that's the question to you, is like, what is that real? How would you describe that relationship with wine that develops as you learn that you don't have to add things, that you don't, that there is a, I'm going to hesitate to say anything because I don't want to add any ideas. But
I mean, I think it's a switch in perspective of seeing wine not as just a product, but like as a living thing that has this powerful ability to show transparency back to a plot of land. And
well said.
I'm sorry?
Well said.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I really think it comes from experiencing a place and like having an intimate relationship with a place and being able to steward it or farm it. Like you notice the daily changes that can be so small, and it's the same thing that you notice in your wine, during the process of fermentation, and how the temperature fluctuates and how the flavors can change and its lifetime. But it's understanding that it is a living thing that transforms on a daily basis. And your job is to kind of usher it along on its life of going from, juice to vinegar. And we're trying to capture this sense and time of the wine, where we think it's at its purest, most potent form. I mean, that's why we use sulfur in our wines. We're trying to capture it in its purest form.
That makes it taste how we envision
exactly
that place is, right? Like just the idea that wine can taste like a place and a vintage, and not necessarily like yeast or like bacteria or something that is avoided when you use a small amount of sulfur.
And we want the wines to have variation from year to year. Like we're going to make decisions based on how we make wine, based on the influences from the environment of the growing season every year. And like there's some years are cooler, some years are warmer.
The wines heat waves or fires or something that forces us to pick grapes at certain times.
Totally. So like we want variation, we want expression, and that's all in hopes of producing a product that's not just a product, that it's like a peek hole into a place.
But we also like addressing your question.
That's great.
I think like we've started to look at wine in the same way that we look at food, and just like simple. Simple is often always better.
Less is more.
Yeah, and like the idea of like what we cook with is gonna be the quality of the food, and the same thing goes with the wine. Right. It's like how the soil is treated, how the vineyard's treated. Like that is what makes the wine good or bad, honestly. And it makes it way more fun. Like we're not just making wine. Like farming a vineyard is so much, like being a vigneron is so much more fulfilling than just making wine. And then challenging yourself to farm regenerative or organic, and like using tools that Mother Nature gives you, farming with nature instead of like fighting with them. It is an incredible, cool, like challenge that's super fulfilling when it's accomplished.
Yeah, well said, both of you. what I've found too is it becomes almost a rabbit hole where I'm now, the deeper I get into trying to integrate natural processes into winemaking, I'm now envisioning sort of like just vines growing in forests using trees as the trellis. You know what I mean? Where it's like it
Okay.
becomes almost, it's like a rewilding of the idea of wine, where it's like even the idea of vineyards is almost becoming too structured and too rigid in my mind in terms of like how it's, how what that ecosystem could be potentially. Of course, there's trade-offs there, and like the ability to farm it would become much more difficult, and not have animals and birds eat it. But this is where my mind goes. It's
No,
like
yeah. I mean, I
like
think you're
that's just
talking
an
about like
example.
the idea of biodiversity and like also just like the most beautiful vineyard is a vineyard that looks like it's a natural part of the landscape.
Yeah,
And like the idea of like having vineyards that don't need to be tilled and having the natives like thriving in the ground, like
yeah,
that's farming in unison with nature, which I think is the goal of of most of the people in this world we're talking about is to farm as if it's naturally there.
yeah, yep. I love that, and I think it's important to say. I'm just gonna do a little thing here with sulfites that using them, especially I'm sure at the level that you guys are using them, which is a minimal effective level, is not. It's not like you're just stopping the wine from evolving. You're basically protecting its evolution from being distorted by spoilage microbes, is the way I would you know try to put it. I guess it's the wine is still going to evolve, the wine is still going to be a living thing, but you've inhibited a microbial life that would turn it to vinegar very quickly, or
Yeah,
whatever, add some other off thing like mouse taint or something like that.
Gina touched on the idea that like wine is basically goes from juice to vinegar, and the use of a small amount of sulfur extends the time period where the wine is the most enjoyable to us. Um,
Right.
and it also extends the period where it tastes as if we intended it to taste, meaning it tastes of that place and of that vintage.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily tainted by some sort of microbial taint or it's oxidized too early.
Those are all distractions
Yeah, that
Yeah.
from the true potential.
and those might happen
Yeah.
eventually. But we'd prefer if they didn't happen, while our customers purchase them to drink them, because we don't think those
Right.
are necessarily the goals of what we were trying to produce, and that's definitely not the goal of what we spent a year farming and then a year making. And so to add, you know, 40 parts of sulfur to a wine total, it seems like a pretty fair trade off to make something that we made for 2 years.
Well, and it's also very
Be tasty,
methodical
yeah.
too. Like this is the only thing that we're adding to our wine, and it's with good intention to capture this thing we're talking about. But it's methodical, and we're looking at the chemistry of the wine and breaking it down to what's the pH and
And
how
how much
much
does it need? Like it might not need any, or
Right.
it might need 9
Right.
parts. Like I made a
Yeah.
Chardonnay last year that literally got 10 parts of sulfur
because
Yeah,
your
that
because the
pH was
pH
so
was 3
low.
1.
Yeah,
It's like
I,
it doesn't need any.
I
But
feel like that was the one I drank.
yeah,
liquor
um
and
beans.
yeah,
yeah.
chances are that wine will last forever, and that's also why I
Yeah.
like aging wine for a long time in barrel. Is because it becomes stable naturally. Like
Right.
the wine is crystal clear. There's no microbial issues. It's gone through all its fermentations. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, just to even to step back from sulfates or anything like that, I what you guys were saying before that, I the way I put it is I use a photography analogy, because I hate posed photos, and I would put sort of like what we think of as manipulative winemaking in that camp of sort of like a posed photo, whereas like for our wedding, Wendy and I we strictly instructed our photographer and videographer that we only wanted candid, never make us stop and do like a dip or whatever. Like please just candids, and because it's a thing, like we just love that, and it's also like we didn't want to take time out of living the moment to, and I'm going off on a tangent. I will. This is related to wine, but it's we didn't want to take time out from living to pose for something false. We wanted them to capture what was actually the true joy of that moment,
Totally. Yeah.
candidly. And I feel like with winemaking, it's, the better photographer is the person who manipulates themselves and positions themselves to capture the light in the right way, to capture the moment in the right way at the right time, rather than try to manipulate
That's
the
100%.
scene.
I mean, that's why like the biggest decision we make is when we pick the grapes, as far as like
Yep.
the winemaking decision. Like, there's bigger
Right.
decisions made in the vineyard before that, like how it's pruned and when it's thinned and how the ground is kept. But like, as far as when the winemaking starts, you're all set
Right.
up by when you pick your grapes and how you manipulate yourself to decide that wine's fate. Like, because then if the acid is right and the ripeness is right, not much needs to happen to the wine. It's way more easy to make unmanipulated, if you will.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's that vision of beauty that, everything has beauty. It's just trying to find it. It's finding that beauty, whether through the timing and perspective on it. Um, I think that's really beautiful. um, Gina, you clearly had a theme with Oregon, Beaujolais, and Central Otago.
Can you
uh,
tell?
all favorites of mine as well. And yeah, I mean, Oregon, especially because it's probably just because it's closer, and I've visited. It's big on our list of
Hmm.
places. But you are farming Pinot and a little Chardonnay. But is in other ways have you been influenced by those regions? And I mean, is that what you're going for with your brand as well, with Lady of the Sunshine?
Um, I think, I mean, the obvious theme there was Pinot Noir, and working in cool climate regions. But
Hmm.
what I really chose to focus on was working for wineries and vineyards that were prioritizing biodynamic farming.
Oh, lovely.
Once
Yeah.
I graduated from the winemaking program, it was so apparent to me, especially after gaining a degree where they taught us recipe winemaking,
And farming.
and conventional farming was considered traditional farming. Um, I was like, I got to get out of here and I got to go expose myself to people who I can be inspired by. And that was really what I wanted to do, was go seek out as many biodynamic producers as possible and go and be a sponge. I felt like I was really lucky with growing up with parents who were, one, in the industry, but then they also prioritized farming for the future and with an emphasis on biodynamic farming. And I really wanted to understand why that wasn't more mainstream, because it was so obvious to me, because it was a part of my, upbringing. Um, and so, working in all those regions, I worked for people who worked with biodynamic vineyards, bought grapes from biodynamic vineyards. But again, I wasn't really making the wine that I'm making now for Lady of the Sunshine. There was, and and yeah, I mean, that was really the theme. I wanted to go and learn as much as I could about biodynamics, and it wasn't really until I started farming the Chene Vineyard in 2018 that, through the act of doing it myself, like the dots truly started to connect. Um,
What
and
are some of those observations that you can share?
It's almost like you have to see the vineyard. Like, at least from my view, is like, I
hmm,
just remember we look at old pictures and we look at pictures and the vineyard was farmed organic, but like there's definitely a spectrum on how things are farmed when it's just said organic. um
Right.
and yeah, it's like the weeds, like noticing the difference in the weeds. And like, so when he took the pictures the first few years, it was like the vineyard was covered in mustard and malva, and like not really like.
which are invasive weeds, and not
Mm.
part of the natural
And
landscape.
now, 3 years later, and creating seed banks and like letting our cover crops go to seed, and like putting the right weeds to outcompete these other weeds. Like, you go through and the vineyard is covered in lupin and poppies and beans and vetch and all these different types of weeds that are benefiting the soil much more than mustard and malva.
It's also a different perspective
Right.
too, in like what you think and what you're taught a vineyard should look like. Like, a
Hmm.
vineyard should mimic nature. There's not always natural order in nature. Like things are kind of messy and like
Yeah. Or I guess the natural order is
Yeah.
not what we picture as order. Like you have to
right.
reprogram what you're taught as order. And it's like pristine Napa looking vineyards is not natural order.
Well, and having a dark green canopy all the way past harvest into October, November isn't natural. Like the vines should want to shut down, and you should start to see that when the seasons start to
Yeah.
change. Like
Yeah, when you look at Gina's vineyard in the fall, it's like, wow, all the other vineyards are green and Gina's is yellow.
mine's like almost asleep.
and like to an uneducated person, and not uneducated, but maybe like just not aware of these dots, it might look like, ooh, she's not really doing very good at that vineyard. And that's the same thing when someone comes to the vineyard and is used to seeing order. But like someone that has seen the dots, you come to Gina's vineyard, it's like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful because it's the perfect messy, and then
Yeah.
also when you're driving the vineyards in the fall and you're like, wow, that vineyard's like going through senescence and is losing its leaves. And you're like, well, they probably don't fertilize or, um,
Right.
like, and so understanding that is like, I start to see things, you start to see things differently. Like you start to see these vineyards that to maybe an untrained eye look beautiful, but to someone who understands the dots is like, oh man, that looks like a really conventionally farmed vineyard.
Gotcha. Yep. Yep. I know exactly what you mean. You guys have these two different wineries. How would you describe the differences between the two?
That's a great question.
Is it just different vineyards that you guys are, getting fruit from and you're practicing different things? Obviously, you're doing cider with Scar of the
I mean,
Sea,
I
so
think
that's
there's a combination there, right? Like you touched on it with different vineyards, so different regions, different terroirs in that way. But Gene and I, we were trained differently. We came from different backgrounds. We have similar philosophies and ethics as far as how we want things to be farmed and how we like to make wines. But that being said, wines made in 100 to 1,000 small decisions, and like because of our different training and our different
Personalities.
personalities,
Yeah.
we make those decisions differently,
yeah.
and those small decisions make up your wine. And so that is like the beauty of a product that has so many decisions, is they can be so different from each other, even though they're made with the intent of good farming and simple winemaking. But the wines are drastically different, whether it's they're aged in oak longer or they're, I, I don't know, just the
Yeah.
different choices. Like I was talking about the destemmer that I just bought, and Gina was like, well, I don't destem any of my grapes. And so it's like, oh, I guess you're right. You're never going to use this thing.
I could
That's the
care less
can at
about
least.
your new destemmer.
Yeah.
Um, well, speaking of your wines, so I got a little box in the mail on Tuesday, which was perfect. It was my day off, and I opened it. And the first thing I noticed is no capsules on your wines, which I am a huge fan of not using capsules.
We
And
are too.
I mean,
Yeah.
why are you? Why has
Well,
that choice been made?
It doesn't serve a purpose for us.
it's just a waste of it's a waste of material. So it's talking about like sustainability or like just
It's the
like
first thing you remove from the bottle.
just packaging, like
Yeah.
talking about just packaging is a giant energy draw in wine.
Yeah.
It
Yep.
probably makes up the biggest greenhouse gas emission for wine, would probably be what how packaging is. And so like the weight of the glass is really important. You might have also noticed that we use it's considered lightweight glass. It's pretty
Yep.
light. It's also green glass, which is a very recyclable color of glass. And then
Okay.
capsules they just go straight in the trash, and they're made of
Yeah.
metals and they're shipped from Spain. And so there's just no reason for it.
Yep. um, Yep, I'm right there with you on all those points with our wine as well. And then I noticed in Lady of the Sunshine you have an ingredients list, which I'm a huge fan of as well. Very limited ingredients, which is also funny. It's those of us who often are willing to put ingredients lists or the least need it. It's like,
Well,
yeah, grapes and a little bit of salt.
yeah. I mean, that's just, I really wanted to include an ingredients list to draw the attention to how it is not a part of typical labeling on wine.
Yep.
And consumers should be asking about what ingredients are in their wine. And it's impossible to find on the internet if you're trying to Google a wine. It's hard to get transparency from the people that make the wine sometimes. And so this was the simplest way to start the conversation for me.
Yeah, no, yep, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, it's funny. I saw an ingredients list recently on a bottle of wine at Ralph's, and I think it was because I think the only reason it was there is because it was Ralph's organic wine. Like
Hmm.
Ralph's now has their own organic wine
Wow, that's
brand.
cool.
Yeah, it is great. I'm fully in support of that. But it's funny because a lot of times, not always, but at that level when you're putting, I think like an organic statement beyond just the ingredients label, you're required to put ingredients on it as well. So
Hmm.
I've heard this from other producers. So if you're trying to say made with organic grapes, for example, the
Then you have to
TTB
list.
person, yeah, might require you to list your ingredients. And so it was funny because it was like, Ralph's Organic Cab from Paso Robles. And then you turn it around and the ingredients, this is like 10
Oh
ingredients.
wow,
You know,
that's interesting. I've seen that on
Yeah.
a Bonnie Doon bottle before.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, wow, there's real stuff in there. And then
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
in the Ridge
Ridge.
bottle, they almost always add acid and water, and they write on there like water, tartaric acid, sulfur, grape.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
And
and
I
Ridge
like
is great.
appreciate that personally.
Me
Well,
too. Me
sometimes
too.
Yeah,
yeah.
And they're doing it voluntarily, like because they're not that I know is voluntary, and
100%. Yeah, no, I know that
I
they
think
do
that
too.
is fantastic. And they can defend every one of those choices, which I love. And if you know anything about winemaking, you can understand why they probably did it based on like, what grapes they are and
Right.
the
And
alcohol level and
and it
that kind of
gives the
stuff.
person a choice to say, "Oh, I don't want to buy that wine because of this."
Right, right.
And that's
Yeah,
like,
like the Ralph's one, gelatin was one of them. And it's like, look, if you're vegan, now like they use horse hooves in your wine.
yeah,
Like so maybe you don't want to buy it. Or whatever animal the product that gelatin came from. But yeah, I just think it's like stand by it. If you're gonna put it in, like, hey,
Well, take
have the have
ownership of it.
I
Yeah,
know.
be able to
yeah,
sit back with
own
your
it.
decision to justify why you're adding things to wine.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No.
So then we tasted all your wines. And so my question for you guys is, you guys ever get into friendly competitions between your different wines?
I don't think so. We have favorites.
And they
We
change frequently too.
like each other's
Yeah.
wines a lot.
Okay.
You know, and just like anyone, like there's like, and that's a funny thing about the wine industry. Like I don't, I'm a competitive person, but like I don't believe in competition within the wine industry. Like I'm not competing
Yeah.
with anyone. Like we
Yep.
are in the same industry and we're here to help each other. And so like then that goes for how me and Gina treat each other's wines, and that's how it goes for how I treat my friends' wines. Like I want everyone's wines to be able to sell and to be successful. Like I'm not trying to like be competitive on that. And so we don't truly really compete with our wines. Like I love Gina's Chardonnay the most, and
Mm.
it's not like my Chardonnay at all, but like it's my favorite wine that she makes. And
I didn't know
yeah.
that.
Hey.
That's fun.
um
But yeah, I mean,
I
it's like we are definitely a team. We work together almost every minute of every day. And so, you know, who depending on our task and what we're doing, one person will take the lead and the other person will help, and that switches all the time. And it's just really helped us build our ability to work as a team, and it's Mikey's success is my success, and vice
yeah.
versa.
and that
Yeah,
goes for other people too. Like your
exactly.
success
Yeah,
is
you
our
said it.
success,
Right.
like
Yeah,
um
no. I'm so glad you guys are doing what you're doing, honestly. It just thrills me. And it's like learning about you and about any, more people who are doing what you're doing just gives me more wine to drink. Like more,
Exactly.
it's like, oh great, like there's somebody else doing beautiful, farming with, very limited minimal intervention winemaking, that, trying to just, philosophically, like I can't believe how in alignment my what I want from wine is what you guys are making, and that just thrills me. It's like whenever I find them, I'm just like, yay.
Well, we feel the
It's
same
a
way too, and we want to like build a community that all shares that same excitement and that mentality.
Well, and it's important for us to like not be competitive here because we need to spread this word. Like
yeah,
agriculture makes up is the second largest producer of greenhouse gas in the world. And
yep.
like we are in agriculture and it's our responsibility to change that. And regenerative farming is a giant tool that needs to be accessible and encouraged for everyone.
And with perennial farm, like when you're farming perennials like vines or fruit trees, that's the easy one. Like those are the easy ones to go organic. Like that, you're not like lettuce must be incredibly difficult on a large scale, I imagine, if you get, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I imagine annuals have a lot more tricky things that you have to really, it's a lot more work. Whereas with perennials, I mean, I know the work is not small, but like this is the easy one, guys. Like we should get this
And it's
right
also a
away.
really
Like,
important one too because like we can do no till on these kind of places and it can be a
right,
carbon sink. Like
right.
It builds on itself.
yeah.
Yeah. We're,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's I totally agree, and I love that you're doing that. And I just wanted to say we loved your wines. I think, and we went back and forth. So I was going to try to see if I could incite any competition, but at the end,
What
it
did we
was like we
send
like
you?
so we a rosé from
Yeah, it was.
Lady of the Sunshine,
Oh, cool.
Uh-huh. And the
and that
Primitivo, which was from my
the
family's property
Primitivo,
near a lake.
right, from your
Yeah.
family property. So that was really cool to taste your family's property, in a style that, if anybody knows what a Primitivo was, you cannot think of it that way at all because it was
That
it was
that
like
wine was
11.5.
heavily influenced by by my time in Beaujolais. It was 100% carbonic Primitivo, which isn't
Oh,
your
wild.
typical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and super like picked obviously super early, like 11.5% alcohol. It was just like bright red fruits and like that. Yeah, of course the sort of almost like red candy flavors that you
Yeah.
get from carbonic and stuff. I didn't know carbonic, but if now it makes
That
sense
clicks.
in a lot of ways. Yeah. And then your rosé, which is also interesting because it's Pinot mixed with Sauvignon Blanc, and you could really distinctively taste both, even though like it was like 70% Pinot
Yeah.
and 30 Sauvignon Blanc. Really interesting and fun way to do a rosé. We're big into I don't know, what do we call it? Sort of like
Breakfast
alternative
wine.
rosés. I love that term too. I just saw it on your website, breakfast wines. We are constantly saying like wine for breakfast. I love wine
Yeah,
for breakfast. Like our wines are for breakfast. Like it pairs well with breakfast, all breakfast.
exactly.
Why do you guys use the term breakfast wine? Just because it's low alcohol, so you can sort of,
No, it's just
it's
like
like
what you
light and
said. It's just like for us, breakfast wine is also like boat wine, which is also just like
yeah,
daytime wine.
Well, I think it all started from like early mornings of fishing. And so Mikey would drag me out on the boat, at 6 a.m. And
And
nice.
then by like 8:30, you're ready for like a glass of
like, I've been
wine.
doing this for a few hours now.
Yeah,
The sun's up. I'm eating a
yeah,
breakfast burrito. I could really go for a glass of wine.
Yeah. And yeah, and the wines are like fresh, like not heavy wines, wines that have this kind of weightlessness to them. And
yeah.
and that's for us like breakfast wine. Doesn't have to be like a carbonic wine or anything like that, but it needs to be like a really pretty weightless, uh, definitely easily drinkable
Well, it's the
wine.
balance. It's
Yeah.
the natural acidity that is the backbone of the wine. And then you have all these other elements that come and help build the body, whether it's,
Alcohol or yeah.
alcohol or time on lees, or, slight oxidation from from barrel fermentation and aging. But it's all these things that kind of round it out to be, it can be a low alcohol wine and also still carry with it, layers of flavor.
Oh yeah.
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 That are easy
And
food
that,
wines too.
But yeah, we love
yes,
breakfast wine.
love that. Yeah.
You didn't tell
If you
already.
couldn't tell. Yeah.
Start with breakfast and see where the day goes.
Yeah. Those are the
And
best kind
then,
of Sundays.
or
Or
Tuesdays.
yeah, I mean, it can really be any day.
We we also so we all you also sent the Chardonnay and Gamay from Scar the Sea,
Oh, cool.
and
Yep.
the Gamay. I think the Gamay was sort of the crowd favorite.
Oh,
If I'm,
cool.
yeah, yeah. If there was a winner, I would have to
That's fun.
give
That's
the
my
nod.
first Gamay that I've
Nice,
produced. Yeah. And
well done.
that came from the Topatero vineyard, which we grafted in 2019. So it's also the first crop
Mm-hmm.
of Gamay.
Oh wow,
From a really cool vineyard, actually right next to the Bassi vineyard
In Avila Beach.
in Avila Beach. So it's at less than a mile from the coast, and it's farmed organic. And Ben and the Topatero and Bassi vineyard are starting their first year of biodynamic conversion this year. So they'll be certified within the next few years.
that's great.
And I guess we
Very
didn't
cool.
touch on certification, but both Gina and I are pretty big proponents of certification in vineyards as a way of just kind of avoiding greenwashing and just the terms that are too loosely thrown around.
Y- Yeah, I mean, so absolutely. So, well, let me put it this way. There was a question I was going to ask you. I wanted to ask you a difficult question, and
Hmm.
this is a good setup for it. So, what happens if you guys? I mean, obviously, you want to make wines low intervention where you're adding nothing besides minimal sulfites. You obviously want to use something that's certified organic or better. What happens if you number one, run into an issue like a stuck fermentation, or you start getting a real like hydrogen sulfide stinky issue in your wine? It becomes super reductive in a bad way. Like you're going to start developing mercaptans if you let it continue down that road. And then that's number one. And number two, what if you know that a vineyard is not certified, but you know that, I don't know, it's being farmed in a nice way, and when I say a nice way, you know that it's exclusively not being sprayed with any petrochemicals or anything that would disqualify it from
Mm-hmm.
being certified, but it's not certified. Or further than that, what if it's just a neglected vineyard? Like what if it's like somebody let a conventional vineyard go for a couple years, and there was no intention to it, but it's basically been just watered by neglect for a couple of years.
Yeah.
What do you do in those instances? How do you react, and
That's a great
where's
question,
your
Adam, because Mikey's actually experienced this over the past few years with Scar of the Sea and the vineyards he works with.
Yeah.
He's done a really good job being a squeaky wheel and talking to farmers and pushing them to transition vineyards he works with towards
Yeah. And
organics.
2020 was the first year that every vineyard I worked with was at the minimum practicing organic.
And this was also, one of
and
the stepping stones of our personal evolution towards
Sure,
wanting
yeah.
to adapt this principle of only working with practicing organic or better vineyards.
In 2019, no
Yeah.
vineyard. 2018 and 2019, no vineyard I worked with used any sort of herbicide. But some of those vineyards were larger, old family traditional vineyards in Santa Maria that, not overnight would switch to organics for me. And that wasn't something that I took lightly. I asked every time. I paid more. And slowly I got them to convert, or if they couldn't, I stopped working with them. And it's just it's, in my opinion, like, I think it's very important to be transparent about it. I would never call the wine all organic or anything like that if it wasn't. And it was always my lowest priced wine. My kind of by the glass or entry level wine would be a combination of practicing organic or vineyards that were in transition to that. And I did it for a long time, and it takes a lot of energy to like be that squeaky wheel. And I think it
Yeah.
actually is really important to be the squeaky wheel and to try to convert these vineyards to farming better, because if no one does that, they won't.
If no one's
Yeah.
asking, there's never going to be positive change.
Yeah.
So
And it's also them seeing that, like, oh, this isn't that hard. to do. A great example is Gina works with a vineyard called the Oliver's Vineyard in Edna Valley. It's owned by the Talley family. And Gina in 2018 started working with it and asked, it has to be farmed. The stuff I get needs to be farmed practicing organic. And it was cool because they were already so close to it. Like they weren't using herbicides and they were using maybe a few
They just had to switch their
fungicide
spray
sprays
program.
that were not organic. And so they switched for Gina in 2018 and then did it again in 2019. And now in 2021, they're converting the whole vineyard and getting it certified because they realized that it wasn't actually more work.
They noticed they were close.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they also noticed that it was having it wasn't disastrous. It was actually beneficial for their vineyard. And then they also decided that it was the next progressive step.
So I guess the answer to your question is I think there should be some grace. It needs to be transparent and like it shouldn't be advertised wrong. But like the goal should be to get to organics. And so that was something also that I realized. There were some vineyards that I thought I could get there and I tried for a long time. We got off herbicides and then we were, we were supposed to be farming organic. And then I just talked to the foreman and realized that I was being told one thing and it wasn't really happening. And so it was just like, okay. And also knowing when to pull the plug and like walk away from a situation.
Yep.
And that is an important lesson too. And then like farming a vineyard, like if a vineyard won't get certified, like that's also their choice. Like we work with our great friend Alice, who farms a vineyard in Los Olivos.
You've interviewed her recently, I think, Adam.
Ibarra Young.
Yeah,
Ibarra
and
Young
that vineyard is amazing. And Alice is farming that vineyard better than almost any vineyard I've seen in America. Like truly regenerative, organic with the most intent. But it's not certified. And so does that make it any less special? Like, I don't think so. Am I not going to work? Like I make a Bar Young Syrah and it's one of my favorite things I make. And like, I'm honored to make that wine. But it might not be in Alice's budget right now or capacity to get certified. So like, we're not going to hold that against her, but
yeah, she's pretty busy.
Yeah. And so I guess I think the best way to tell what someone's true intent is to see what they do themselves. And so like the vineyard that we're responsible for, that we farm, is certified biodynamic, right? And so that's where our goal is. But do we force every vineyard we work with to do it? Like that's not really feasible.
No, but you've given some really good examples that it's, you almost have to show them that like there is business for them if they're willing to do this. And then if they respond in kind, there's a give and take there. There's like, you're showing them, hey, you can do this. They're saying like, okay, great, I'm willing to try. There's a reward for them. It's like, it becomes a win-win situation. And if they don't want to do that, then at a certain point, you can also show them there's a lose for you if you don't go this way, because we're going to take our business elsewhere,
Yeah.
And it's not like you're trying to punish anybody, but like that's just
we get to choose where we spend our money.
Yeah,
that was another big thing for us, and it was like
let's invest in the farmers that we want to.
Yeah, like I was buying a decent amount of grapes from Bienacido Vineyard in Santa Maria, and it, I really liked that vineyard, and it was being farmed the way I wanted, but it was a larger operation than I truly wanted, and I've redone my sourcing to where I don't buy grapes from vineyards that are owned like that. I buy grapes from vineyards that are being farmed by our like Alice and by our friend Ben at Topatero and Mike Seiner at Bassi, and we choose to put our money where we want, and like it's a conscious choice. And so, and also when someone buys our wine, they're putting their money towards that person, right? So it's an important step to like understand your sourcing, and
Well, and the certification seal is like a stamp of authenticity. It doesn't mean, in the example of these other vineyards that are farming, practicing organic, like that's the hard work is already being done. Whether they have a certification or not doesn't mean that the land's not being farmed to a certain quality, right?
Right. It's more about just like the proving you're doing it. And so it's just like,
it's just in this world where the words natural and organic and biodynamic are used very loosely because they're trendy, and there is this movement of people wanting to move towards greener ways of running their businesses and farming, and so these words can get overused without the weight behind it carried out in action.
Yeah.
So that's why we are advocates for certification,
Yeah.
because it's accountability, which leads to responsible action.
And then
Right.
I guess your final part of that question, the first part you asked, which was,
Yeah, in the winery
like,
then.
if something goes wrong in the winery, our goal is to not have that happen.
Yeah.
Is the first
Prevention is the best
prevention of
medicine,
that
right?
would be the key aspect.
Well, and learning from your mistakes.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, in 2018, we had some stuck ferments that we basically built a tent. We stirred the lees every 6 hours, I felt like. And we did our best to get those wines to go dry naturally. And there was a few barrels that wouldn't, and got stuck. And
But when you make wines in the style we do, you limit the amount of tools that you have available to you, right? And so what we
Yeah.
learned through stuck fermentations was that we were using native yeast, and it was a cool environment. And so what we really needed to push that fermentation through to completion was a warmer environment and getting those lees into suspension. And so Mikey is now an incredible fort builder.
yeah,
And we've built so many forts, and we stick heaters in there, so we create like a hot room within the winery to get the yeast nice and active, and we stir the lees to get the lees and yeast up into suspension so they can do their jobs.
And then as like a lesson learned, and since 2018, so 2019 and 2020 and going forward, we actually ferment all of our white wines outside, like in the sun. And so we like warm ferments. We like our wines to go dry quickly.
And barrels are actually really great insulators. So like even as it gets hot during the day, like the temperature of the wine rises slowly, and then you have the cooling of the night, and so your temperature fluctuates just a little bit.
Right.
By the time the sun pops up again, and now we're back into a warmer environment. And so having warm native fermentations has been the lesson learned that we've moved forward with.
And then your other question, like a reduced wine, is something we definitely have dealt with, and it's not something I want to deal with. And there's natural ways of dealing with reduction, and it's racking off the lees. So like the first step is like, what is causing the reduction? Is it the lees? Is it the yeast? What's happening? And so the yeast might be struggling, so we might need to get it warmed up, or it might be too warm, so you might need to cool it down. And so it's doing a racking, getting the wine off the lees, smelling the lees, and then saying, oh, okay, it was the lees, or you smell the lees and they smell great. And it's like, shit, it wasn't the lees. And
let's say it's like poor nutrients in the grape, so you don't have high yans, and so the yeast are struggling with.
Yeah, my experience with that is that like that's a pretty good reduction. That will sort itself out over time. So like
depending.
Yeah, depending. As an emergency thing, like if it is reduced to a point where we took it to a lab and like this is a dangerous situation, we've used copper pipes where we've like put a copper pipe in a barrel. Like we basically use fishing line and like string up like a wind chime of copper pipes, and I'll put that in the barrel.
Yeah.
That's not like a regular.
I've racked through copper pipes before.
What's that?
I've racked through copper pipes.
Like that's the same idea. Yeah. Like if you went to France and noticed a certain thing, like they have a racking on a copper pipe or a splash plate that's a copper splash plate. I've really only done that like once. Most of the time with any sort of reduction, it will go away with the racking.
Or adding healthy lees.
Adding lees to the wine.
Yeah, I've had my Sauvignon Blanc from last year went reduced during fermentation, and I had been consolidating a Chardonnay lot that was dry, and from the empty barrels I collected the lees and distributed it throughout, and it, like we talked about earlier, it kind of ended up fining out the reduction and helped it get out of the reduced state.
And then honestly, like
the magic of
the final and last resort that I've ever had to deal with is actually just selling the wine to someone else. And so yeah, those are some examples of when some wines have gone not where we wanted, that we either learned lessons or tried to use the most natural approach to winemaking.
I love that. You know, I was thinking back to the packaging thing, and I think the like the goal that we are all shooting for is sort of like a wine aqueduct. So just eliminate all packaging, and we just have a big corridor of wine flowing through California, and we just there's it comes out in the tap.
Yeah, that would
That's
be
what we need.
epic.
Adam, you just solved all the world's problems.
I know, it's like I wish I liked kegs better. I have a problem with like I just don't know. It's always like there's everything's gray, right? Like there's no easy answers to anything. And like so like
Right, right.
I've kegged some ciders before, and I like the idea of it because it's not using glass and it's potentially a lower input. But then these kegs are plastic, and
Yep,
um,
yep,
and they don't recycle very well. And then I just hate plastic, so I'm just like
yep,
I don't know what the answer is here. Um,
yeah.
and
What about like beer keg style,
yeah,
like
that's cool.
steel?
It's logistically so challenging because those kegs are
Yeah,
so expensive, and the
yep,
rental programs are really complicated and expensive.
yep.
And
It would almost only work if you could just handle it right out. Like if your front of your winery was a tap room
yeah, it
kind of
could
thing.
work for your own place, or if you had like 3 bars that you're like, these are the kegs, and they got brought back to you.
Right.
But that just doesn't exist, at least here.
Right. Yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. Well,
And it's also
guys, what
just, I guess for me,
yeah.
like I like drinking wine at my house, and
Yeah.
I, you know, I want to open a bottle of wine and drink that wine, and I don't know,
Yes.
so it's like it's also a behavioral thing. Like you're talking about something that's like a totally different
Approach.
approach to wine than we currently do.
Yeah, and everything is complicated. Like so now there are plastic wine bottles
Mm.
being introduced on the market, and how do you feel about
I'm
those?
not
I mean, I know
sure
you
how I
hate
feel about
plastic
that.
as I do too, but like,
Yeah.
let's say, like, I imagine we could probably find a study that would show that the carbon footprint reduction would be so great that any of the sort of negative side of production of plastic would be offset by that. By shipping plastic bottles around the country at a fraction of the weight of a glass bottle. How do
Yeah,
you? I
I
don't
mean,
know.
I think that's a great question. I hate plastic so much that I have like
Yeah.
a instinctively not interested in
Just a
that.
revulsion. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
just like because of the ocean and the plastics out there, it's
Yeah.
like disgusts me.
Yeah.
Um,
Canned wine is always an
yeah,
option.
Gina does do a canned wine with some friends,
The boys
Ryan
at
Sturm and
Companion.
the
Hmm.
Companion guys, and I
Okay.
think that's a really cool
Different approach.
packaging.
Yeah.
Just a different option.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like you said, they're just not the easiest of answers.
Yeah. I well, I like what you guys are doing, which is, what I think the some of the best that you can do that can be done right now before we come up with better answers. And it sounds like you guys are on that path anyway. So if there is a better answer, you'll probably adopt it as
Well,
well.
yeah, I mean that's just part of evolving, right? Like as we
Yeah.
learn, like and evolve our approaches, like we're constantly trying to get better, and that's why we visit certain people, and that's why we talk to as many people as we can, just so we can continue to learn and make progress. This year we went to the Monarch tractor demo, which
Oh
is
yeah.
an electric self-driving tractor, and
Solar powered too,
yeah,
right?
solar
Like it has
powered, has a weather station on it. It's a robot. It literally will copy all your movements to the cloud and then mimic them on the next pass.
wow.
And like the potential there is insane. And so like really interested in the day that we can do that. I think
Yeah.
like the elimination of diesel on the farm is is really interesting and inspiring.
Love that.
And yeah,
Well, you guys, what is the best way for people to learn more and get in touch, find out, buy your wine?
I mean, I think the
What would you
easiest way is through our Instagram. In truth, like as far
And our
as like,
websites. Yeah.
yeah, maybe not buying wine, but if people want to see what we're doing or send us a message, like Instagram is the easiest way to
Hmm.
actually get a hold of us, or like to keep
what
tabs on how we're farming or what we're doing in the winery.
What are your Instagrams?
It's mine is Scar of the Sea, but in between each word is an underscore.
Okay.
Mine's Lady of the Sunshine, and I think I have periods in between each word.
Yeah.
I'd have to check.
Okay.
And then purchasing our wine, it's either going to our website or going to your local shop and seeing if they have our wines, and if they don't have them, asking them if they have them or if they could get them, is like kind of how we operate. We want the small wine shops to be able to sell our wines, and if that's not the case, then they can always go on our website and we can ship the wines to them.
I love it. Yeah, and it's Scar of the Sea Wines and Lady of the Sunshine Wines.com.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been, like I said, it's just a joy to know you and know that you're out there doing that, and know that your wines are close and local, and I can get some great cider here from you. I'm just excited. I'm just actually looking at your shopping page at the 6-pack of cider, and you may be getting an order from me.
We'd love to
thank you. Is there
cider.
Is there anything you guys wanted to end with? Any final thing that we didn't talk about?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we did.
No, thank you, Adam.
Oh, thank you, guys. I really appreciate it, and we'll I'm sure run into each other soon.
Yes, hopefully next time it'll be over a bottle of wine or two
in your garden in LA.
Yes,
yeah, we want to come see your garden. We're very jealous.
Or if you want to come up to Chene or the winery or Bassi and check out the vineyards, you're always welcome.
I definitely do. It's hopefully I'll get up there before it's time for me to start dealing with harvest again.
Or maybe we can carpool to Lopez on the next.
Oh, that might be nice. That might be really nice. Yeah.
Lots of options.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you were inspired, got some great ideas, and also discovered some new great California wines and ciders to try. And speaking of trying new wines, if you'd like to try our wines, that's Centralis Wines, we are now hosting tastings by appointment at our house in South Los Angeles. You can see how we've converted a small Los Angeles yard into a biodiverse, regenerative, organic permaculture food and wine garden, meet our chickens, pick our brains about gardening and winemaking, and taste Centralis wines outside under the Pinot Noir vines that grow up over our pergola. Just email info@centraliswine.com to set an appointment. Tastings are $25 per person, but we waive the fee if you buy a couple bottles or more. That's info@centralis wine.com. We'd love to see you.